Welcome back to Heart of Texas Histories and Mysteries. I'm your host, Em, coming to you as always from deep in the heart of Texas. In today's episode, I'll be telling you about an older, lesser-known case out of Courthouse County. It occurred in the early 20th century and involved a young woman named Verna Ware. Verna Mabel Ware was born on November 17th, 1888 in a community known as The Grove. That's about 16 miles southeast of Gatesville. She was one of 12 children born to George Madison Ware and Margaret Cornelia Riding Ware. By all accounts, the Wares were a well-respected farming family. In 1908, Verna became acquainted with a young man named John J. Haynes. She was 19 at the time, and John was either 20 or 22, depending on the source. John, who also came from a respectable local farming family, was supposedly studying pharmacy. According to most versions of the story, Verna accepted some chocolates from John at a spring picnic. Unbeknownst to her, he had laced them with a sedative. He then took her somewhere private and took advantage of her. In another version of the story, John and Verna spent the night together after attending a dance. But according to both versions, on Christmas Eve, 1908, Verna gave birth to John's child, a little girl she named Opal Catherine. In January 1909, John Haynes was charged with seducing Verna Ware. He went to trial in February. Verna and her brother Ezra, and possibly one of their sisters, traveled to the county courthouse in Gatesville to witness the event. Verna was convinced that John would be acquitted and could not fathom the idea of him being able to live freely in society again. As she watched the proceedings through the interior window that separated the public gathering space from the courtroom, she reached into her purse and pulled out a .38 caliber revolver. Verna Ware fired at John Haynes through the glass, shooting him at least twice, maybe 3 times, in the back. She then shot 3 more men who were in the courtroom: James J. Smith, Dave Ross, and A.P. Wiley Jr. It's been said that after this, she put the gun to her own head, but that people standing near her successfully wrestled it away from her. One can only imagine the pandemonium that struck the courtroom. One spectator who had been sitting on a windowsill is said to have fallen backward and landed on the ground outside the courthouse, breaking his leg. Judge Arnold, who was presiding over the case, did his best to maintain his composure as the mayhem unfolded. He instructed courthouse officials to take Verna Ware down to the basement, where the jail was located. The doctors who examined her reported that she was in a critical condition of nervous collapse. Of the 4 men Verna Ware fired upon, only A.P. Wiley Jr. survived. John Haynes died on the scene, and it seems that James Smith and Dave Ross both clung to life for no more than a few days before they succumbed to their injuries. It's believed that Mr. Smith, Mr. Ross, and Mr. Wiley were in the courtroom as character witnesses for John Haynes. Verna was charged with 3 counts of murder and charged with carrying a gun into the courthouse. Her bond was set at $7,500, $2,500 for each of the men she had fatally shot. Many local residents felt sympathy for Verna, and she received enough donations to make bail. But she was in custody for a few days before being released on bond, and during that time, a group of John Haynes's friends allegedly gathered outside the courthouse and made threats of violence against her. It was said that officers arrested the leader of the group and that they ordered the other members of the group to leave the courthouse grounds. Verna's trial began in late 1909 and continued into early 1910. According to news reporters, her testimony was so emotional that it brought tears to the eyes of some jurors and members of the public. She was found not guilty by reason of temporary insanity on the murder charges. While she was found guilty of the gun charge, she was only required to pay a fine. Verna Ware was a free woman. In 1912, Verna married a man named William Raymond Eck, who is said to have adopted her young daughter Opal and raised her as his own. The family lived in the Dallas-Fort Worth area before moving on to Oklahoma and then to Utah. William Raymond Eck passed away in Clearfield, Utah in 1918. Verna Ware Eck remained in Clearfield after his death and died there on July 31st, 1973, at the age of 84. According to her obituary, she worked as a buyer for a clothing store and was an active member of her local Baptist church. As far as I can tell, she went on to live a quiet, normal life after everything that had happened back in Texas when she was a young woman. What she shared about her past with friends and acquaintances she made along the way, and even what she shared with her husband and daughter, is really anyone's guess. Verna's daughter Opal passed away in 1996 in Clearfield, Utah. She worked at the Naval Supply Depot in Clearfield as well as at Hill Air Force Base and married Louis Rasmussen. Interestingly, her obituary lists her birth date as December 24th, 1914, not December 24th, 1908. So, while we know from newspaper articles that John Haynes really did go to trial for seducing Verna Ware, that Verna shot him and the 3 other men at the courthouse in Gatesville, and that Verna was tried for this, Opal could not have been the biological daughter of John Haynes, who died in 1909. It seems likely that that detail was woven into Verna Ware's story later on to make it more sensational, and that Opal was in fact the biological child of Verna and her husband, William Eck. Could Verna have had a child by John Haynes before she met and married William Eck? A child she gave up for adoption or gave to a family member to raise? Possibly, but I couldn't find any evidence to support that. So there you have it. The story of Verna Ware and the violent events that unfolded in the Courthouse County Courthouse one fateful winter day. I wish I had a bit more information on this case, or at least a photo of Verna or any of the other people who were involved in this story, but I don't. That being said, I wanted to share this story because I did find it interesting, and I figured it was something a lot of people probably hadn't heard of. I certainly didn't know about it until recently. And before I go, there's one more thing I'd like to mention. Some say that if you're in the Courthouse County Courthouse and you hear a sound you can't explain, feel a sudden breeze, or feel as if someone just tapped you on the shoulder when no one is around, it could very well be the spirit of one of the men who died that day in 1909. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, y'all.